All right, button.
We are here with JD Heyman, Deputy Editor of People. Unfortunately, today we are reporting some very sad news on the passing of Prince. Can you tell us what's going on?
Well, as you all know, Prince has died. It was quite a shock, and the entire staff of People is reporting exhaustively on all of the events leading up to this tragedy and learning a lot about Prince's life and times and celebrating the enormous influence he had on popular music.
Yeah, we've just received a few responses from celebs, Barry Manilow and Carmen Electra. Any that stand out that have been interesting for you, JD?
Well, everybody is saying, everyone from Justin Timberlake to Sheena Easton to, as you said, Barry Manilow is talking about what an influence Prince had and are speaking to us about that. But for me, it's the members of his family. Maite Garcia, his ex-wife, spoke to us exclusively, talking about what a devastating loss this was. People may remember that Prince and she had a child that they lost, a son, and she talked about how she felt that he was in heaven with the son they lost and how devastated she was to lose this part of her life. And you really can't underestimate the enormous impact that he had on the culture and the number of lives and indeed careers that he changed forever.
Yeah, I mean, people are sort of writing about obviously how sad this is, but also that they're so shocked. Was there any indication that we had or the world had that he might have been ill?
Well, it's an interesting story. One of my close sources said to me that, he knew Prince. You can't really underestimate or the privacy that Prince had. He was a very, very private person, and so even people who knew him didn't necessarily know if he had health issues or anything specific. That was not something that he shared widely. And while there, of course, at this moment is a lot of speculation about his health, what we do know is that a couple of weeks ago he went into the hospital complaining of the flu. He was released. He went on to perform and do an amazing job at his final concert. There seems to have been, sort of an ongoing issue there afterwards. He was trying to treat whatever that flu was, and then he died quite suddenly. So no, there isn't any word about anything else beyond that. But of course, a lot of questions being raised about him. But he was a person who attracted, a certain mystery and questions about what his life was really like. And I'm sure in the coming days we'll know a little bit more. At this point, I think people are just dealing with their grief.
I mean, what you said was that there was always a mystery about him, and I certainly think from both a journalistic and just human perspective, I always wondered about him. He seems so interesting and sort of an enigma. Where did that come from? Do we think that was part of who he was organically and from growing up, or was that part of the act of who Prince was?
Well, I think, like with all great stars, he was very much in charge of his persona, and he created a persona that was built a little bit on withholding and being a bit private. But there were other reasons for that, I think, that were rooted in who he was and where he was from and how he lived his life. Prince came from Minneapolis. He was extremely devoted to his home city and his home state. He spent most of his life, his professional life, was really based there. He wasn't at all interested in celebrity for celebrity's sake. I mean, he certainly knew how to create celebrity, and he had a sort of cult of personality around him because he was fascinating. But he wasn't somebody who seemed to crave that as much as he was a musician. And his musicianship is really what stands out. I mean, he worked incredibly hard. He recorded at certain points in his life at least one song a day. He collaborated with pretty much anybody that he admired and respected or admired and respected him. And I think that's where his real joy in life was. But it's to some degree it has to do with the fact that he was just not interested in, the kind of celebrity promotion that, you associate with folks who are famous.
Right. In fact, one of our viewers here, Kimberly Fountain, just wrote he was very private and quiet. I think you're right. That was his choice, was to present himself as a performer and not necessarily share all the other things about his life.
True, but it is important to note that he was very much aware of that from the very beginning of his career. He was sort of the architect of his career and a lot of other careers, when Prince became famous in the late 80s, mid-late 80s, he really, he really, from the very beginning, was kind of an impresario. He had other performers that he developed. He collaborated very strategically with other people in the public eye. He, obviously people remember Purple Rain. That was a movie that was semi-autobiographical, based in, there was always this idea that he was really ahead of his time, kind of manufacturing his own celebrity and his own mythology and his own studio system with his own talent, and really identifying that. The other interesting thing about Prince, obviously, was from the very beginning he was a great champion of other artists, and particularly women artists. He really went out of his way to work with certain people, everybody from, like I said, from Joni Mitchell to Sheena Easton. I mean, he really was a fan of working with other musicians and promoting their careers.
Yeah. One of our viewers also just mentioned that they had heard that he may have been working on a memoir. Do we have any reports of that?
He was indeed working on a memoir, and I don't know actually at this point how far along it was. Clearly, he had one of the great American stories. His context was totally different. People who love music and people who study pop culture will tell you that he was kind of a singular artist. He came around at a time, if you were to listen to the radio in the mid-'80s, and what was mostly being played, was a very segmented time. Genres, racially, a lot of things were separated, and Prince really was a boundary breaker from the very first moment he appeared. He appealed to people who liked rock music, he appealed to people who liked R&B, and he was really able to innovate and create a kind of sound, quite coincidentally, in a way that evokes David Bowie and other people who are real musical artists and change makers.
Yeah. So really all true, and I think that really speaks to why so many people are devastated today. As we've seen, people on our staff and people around the world have been just really shocked and saddened. Most of a lot of these comments are very curious about what he passed away from, and I'd love to maybe get to that in a second. But also, Minneapolis was an incredibly important thing to Prince. One of our reporters just described the scene there. What is going on in his hometown? Do we have any indication of what's happening there?
Oh, my goodness. I mean, Minneapolis, indeed the entire state of Minnesota, was central to who Prince was, and it was a symbiotic relationship in a lot of ways. Anybody who's been to the Twin Cities, anybody who's been to Paisley Park, anybody, which is in the suburb of Chanhassen, just outside Minneapolis, he was an incredibly patriotic Minnesotan, and he really supported the arts there, invented really a music scene there. He really broke through in the Minneapolis music scene. He helped nurture a lot of artists there. First Avenue, really one of the great rock clubs in the world, was part and parcel of who he was. A lot of people came and collaborated and worked with him at Paisley Park. Again, you really have to understand that context. He came out of a different tradition of music, and although he owed a lot, especially to Stevie Wonder and a lot of other artists, and Jimi Hendrix and a lot of great musicians, I think he really benefited from being from this very special place. The Twin Cities, Minneapolis, is a tolerant place in many ways. At the time he was growing up in and dealing with a lot of racial issues there, and formed who he was, but it was a very different context than a lot of American cities. And I think that really nurtured and supported him, and he was incredibly grateful, to the point where if you lived in Chanhassen or if you spent any time around Paisley Park, it wasn't as if you might not see him, or he was a good neighbor. He was, he was engaged in his community, and I think it was meaningful to him to stay loyal to that.
Yeah. That all makes sense. Again, a lot of these folks are very curious about what may have happened. Obviously, the police are not reporting anything, but will there be an autopsy at some point? Do we anticipate that happening?
I think we're going to know a lot more in coming days, and there are questions. Again, he was extremely private. We do know that he had some what would seem to be minor health concerns over the last couple of weeks, and that he was trying to deal with those. People have been describing this as the flu, and it very well likely may be something not that exciting, and just very sad. That caused him to die. But we do know that from our own sourcing, he was extremely private about his health, and not necessarily always in the best health. He was, a small person who was, sort of fragile in some ways. That again, if you watched him perform, there was this incredible athleticism, and even up until the very last performance that he gave, there was no indication on stage while he was performing that he was dealing with anything. He seems to privately have been pulling back a lot, though.
Yeah, that's really, it's sort of tough to reconcile the fact that he gave such an amazing performance. I think it was Saturday night.
Yeah.
And really it didn't seem like that stirred any rumors or indication that this man was really ill, which is just it's sort of hard to wrap your brain around that.
Well, I think a lot of people were actually concerned when he was initially hospitalized, and that did spark a lot of concern about Prince's health, partially because Prince has always been someone who's been extremely private. So when that happened, there were people talking, is this a serious problem? What's going on? And people said that it was simply the flu and that he'd gone in, and he certainly had been to a pharmacy or two in the last few days trying to get medication for whatever that was, but it wasn't a profound crisis that anyone knew of. Mm-hmm. But again, I think part of who he was not to share that. So if indeed there was something more serious going on, I expect that will be revealed.
And do we have any firm reporting, or what is the reporting on his religious beliefs? Whether or not he is a Jehovah's Witness, and if there's any implications as to the medical approach to one's health if one is a Jehovah's Witness?
Well, first, I want to say Jehovah's Witnesses do go to doctors, and they do seek medical care. He was part of that tradition, but there's no indication that he took steps to treat his health differently that we know of based on that. And I would want to be careful about not speculating about that, because I think we simply don't know of any different behavior based on his religious beliefs.
Right, and also we're not going to have that information because that's private information between him and his doctor.
Right. I mean, he took steps to take care of himself as he did, and certainly anyone who engaged with him professionally or in his private life didn't see anything untoward until recently.
Yeah. So again, everyone here is incredibly sad. Folks are actually saying that they hope that his some of his business does stay private. People are shocked. Marissa Meyer Payne says, "I love you, Prince." JD, as we sign off, any memories that you have of what Prince was as you grew up and went through your life? Do you have any favorite songs or recollections?
Oh, for sure. My goodness. Yeah, I mean, I loved Prince, and like a lot of people, my generation, I went and I lived in the Twin Cities, and I went to Paisley Park, and I hung out in the parking lot, and I tried to look in the door and see what was going on there and hope that Prince was there. And if you spend any time, if you ever spend any time in Minneapolis and St. Paul, it is impossible not to feel the influence of him. But I also, just as a person, again, if you have any memory of the 80s and 90s, Prince didn't sound like anybody else. He was a completely revolutionary artist, and that's not an understatement. I mean, when we talk about his influence on music, it's significant and it's real, and he was able to break all kinds of barriers for people of color, for people of different gender identities, for women. I mean, he really was kind of one of a kind. So on a personal note, whenever you lose an icon of his stature and you have some kind of personal life experience of listening to that music, and I guess for me, I mean, I loved Raspberry Beret. I thought that was a great song, but all of his songs are pretty great. And I liked his version of Case of You by Joni Mitchell. I think that's pretty outstanding.
Awesome. All right, well, we'll let you get back to work and reporting this story. Thanks for taking the time, JD.
Thanks.
Bye.